All right, should we let everyone in? Let's do it. For some reason, I am freezing. I keep freezing on my end. Let me know if that happens, if you see that happens.
You've been fine on my end.
Okay. All right, I was just waiting for everyone to trickle in here and I'll let everyone in at the same time. It is wonderful to see folks. I know it has been a little while since we have had a meeting. But I am excited that we are able to meet now. And I am seeing a lot of folks who have been here in the past and also a bunch of folks who are new to this group. So that is fantastic. All right. So I'm going to get started. I am Heidi Alexander, the director of the Massachusetts SJC Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing, which is our state task force that addresses well-being in the profession. I'm also the current president of the Institute for Wellbeing in Law, which is a national organization working to improve well-being in the profession. So I encourage you to check both of those organizations out. I can put the we'll put the links in the chat. Today, so this is our Legal Wellbeing Network meeting. We started these meetings now, I guess almost 4 years ago, which is unbelievable to me. This was really a way for folks in the community to come together, to share ideas, to exchange resources, to learn from one another, really with the shared goal of fostering a healthier and more supportive environment in the legal profession. And we welcome you regardless of whether you are in Massachusetts or from outside of Massachusetts. We tend to invite local speakers who can talk about what they may be doing in their workplaces. We also invite other folks who we think you might like to hear from, and we're always open to different ideas and suggestions in terms of who you might like to hear from or topics you might like to discuss. Sometimes these meetings are very discussion heavy. Sometimes we have more presenters. We always do like to engage in some sort of discussion. So we're always happy to hear from folks, whether it be just in the chat or whether you want to raise your hand and speak. Today's meeting, we had about 80 some people register, and I think right now we've got about 35. So I expect there'll be some other folks who will trickle in, but a nice group today for discussion. And like I said, it's been a little while since our last meeting. We do try to host these meetings every other month. That's the goal. Although this summer, I don't think we'll have another meeting in July or August, since that we'll be competing with vacations that we hope you're all taking. But we will resume with another meeting in the fall. We do record all of these meetings. We try to, if it's a particular discussion, we'll end the recording before the discussion and really focus on the speaker. Today, I think we're going to be recording most of the program. So the recording has started, and you can view all the previous recordings on our website, and we'll put that link in the chat as well. So I want to introduce our speaker today, and I think many of you know Gavin Alexander, who is the Wellbeing Director at Jackson Lewis. He is also a member of the SJC Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing, part of the inaugural group of folks that joined the committee, and was also a former fellow of the committee for a year. And I think, like I said, I know many of you know Gavin and the immense passion that he brings to this work. We'll also put a link in the chat. Gavin recently wrote an article that was published in PLI, which was entitled Influencing Lawyer Wellbeing with Collaborative Clarity, which really focuses on the significant impact that supervisors have on supervisee mental health, emphasizing that clear and collaborative communication can help alleviate the stress and improve well-being. And so he is going to share some of the work that he's doing at Jackson Lewis and lead us in a discussion. And we do hope that people chime in again through the chat. Feel free to raise your hand. Gavin doesn't mind being interrupted, so we're willing to engage in a conversation. Happy to do that with you. Again, like I said, if there are other topics that you would like to see this group address in the future or different speakers, please let us know. We're really trying to do this for you, and again, trying to kind of bring more people to this movement and help you take some of this work and implement it in your own workplaces. So, Gavin, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Heidi. Great to be here. Worth noting, Heidi and I are not related, despite having the same last name and having worked together since the outset of the SJC Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing. But I'm so grateful for everything Heidi does, both at a local and national level, and what a lot of you I'm seeing in the chat do to promote and advocate for improved well-being in law. Beyond my or sort of historically looking past my background as a well-being advocate in the legal profession, I come to this work as a lawyer for again, I'll briefly summarize who I am for those of you who don't know me. I know a lot of you attending this do know who I am, but I'll summarize the high points. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2012. I then clerked for the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, and then I was a corporate associate at a global law firm here in Boston for almost 8 years. And during that time, during law school, all the way through the early and mid stages of my practice, I absolutely and definitively experienced mental illness that I left untreated and undiagnosed because I was terrified of the impact on my career and trajectory having a paper trail of having received mental health treatment would have. So I got care way too late. And I even admitted to anyone that I was experiencing symptoms of mental illness until way too late. I tell a lot of folks, and particularly this particular month, noting some of the hearts and rainbows behind me, I tell a lot of folks that I was comfortable enough to come out as bisexual when I was 16. I was not comfortable enough to come out as experiencing mental health challenges till I was 30. And during that time, my mental health deteriorated and got worse and worse until in my, I believe the beginning of my 4th year as an associate, I tried to end my own life. And I survived, obviously, and started making some changes that really did help me thrive. And I stayed at that firm for another 3 years, very successfully, actually. And then when 2020 rolled around and the SJC was kicking this off, this well-being project into high gear, I jumped on board and transitioned into doing this work full-time in the fall of 2020. So that's a little bit about me, my firm. I am speaking, by the way, in my individual capacity. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing at Jackson Lewis. but I'm speaking on behalf of myself and myself alone, and any opinions and thoughts I share do not necessarily reflect the opinions of either Jackson Lewis, the SJC Standing Committee, or anyone else I may be affiliated with, which are too many things. Any of you who know any of my work in the past know one of my biggest soapboxes, one of the things I care about most in well-being from a legal standpoint, is the importance of recognizing that it is a two-way street. That even for corporate well-being, which has been around for a lot longer than lawyer well-being, even in the corporate well-being space, and through to the sort of formation of the lawyer well-being space, a great deal of emphasis, in fact, I would say the vast majority of the emphasis was placed on self-help. Placed on putting resources out there that individuals could take advantage of to help themselves cope with the stresses of well-being, or get care, or teach themselves important and useful skills like mindfulness and therapy and coaching and all of these wonderful, wonderful things. My perspective has always been that is important, but we absolutely cannot ignore the other side of the equation, which is what are the root causes that are contributing to adverse well-being in the legal profession? How are they impacting the legal profession differently or more significantly than they are affecting the general population? And what can we be doing to mitigate them? Acknowledging that certain aspects of the legal profession are not going to be mitigated anytime soon. It is inherently a stressful profession. Like nothing I'm going to do, or any of us will be able to do, will be able to make lawyering a low stress, relaxing profession that everyone walks into the office every day with a smile on their face and leaves every day at 5 o'clock, happy and thrilled with everything going on in their workplace. That's just not what law is. It is adversarial, it is combative, it is argumentative, it is challenging. And it is a client service industry. So, or for all of us outside the public sector, it is a client service industry, and we are dealing with clients who are often aggressive, antagonistic, and sometimes even obnoxious to their own lawyers. So law is stressful. Some aspects of the way law has been practiced forever in the United States, literally since before the United States existed, are entrenched in how we do things in such a way that we're not going to be able to get away from them anytime soon. The number one contributor there is the billable hour. Anyone familiar with the billable hour knows that it has an adverse impact on well-being. And that's not going to go away within the next 5 years. Maybe within the next 20 to 30. You never know. The next generation is starting to think about things in a pretty radically different ways, and I'm optimistic that they are going to push for more radical change when they become leaders and partners and directors and all of the above. But for now, we're working within a system that for anyone in private practice, which is the vast majority of lawyers, is dealing with the billable hour as a significant contributor. And for those in the public sector, you're dealing with typically overwork, underpay, and courts. And courts are their own issue. But, so if you acknowledge that certain things are not going to change anytime soon, and I'm practical in that respect, I always try to say, like, we do the individual stuff to promote resources and help self-help. On the organizational and institutional side, there are things that are not going to change right now. Maybe long-term advocacy, and I will to the longer-term advocacy side of the equation, and in Heidi's incredible leadership there. But for now, what can we do? So what are aspects of legal practice that at the organizational, institutional, or interpersonal levels we can change to improve well-being while maintaining, I'm in the private sector, so while maintaining profitability or even improving profitability, while maintaining success and prestige and client successes, you name it. What can we be be doing to promote well-being at a interpersonal, institutional, or organizational level. I jumped in when I joined Jackson Lewis on the sort of hitting the ground running. And actually even before, when I was fellow with the SJC Standing Committee, one of my biggest pieces of advocacy was acknowledging that lawyers are not trained to be managers of other human beings. They are trained to be lawyers. And some of them get some amount of sort of basic, like, don't be I swear a decent amount. That's part of how I express myself authentically. It is actually important to me in terms of how I communicate. I hope that doesn't bother anyone too much. But it is really important to train someone, you know, not to be an asshole, but at the same time, that's not enough, right? There have been decades of, there are entire master's and PhD degrees in organizational psychology, in professional leadership, in how to interact with other human beings in a organizational setting in a more positive manner. And law has not embraced those schools of thought at a really systemic level to date. When I was growing up through the ranks as an associate and eventually senior associate, and started working more and more with the partners directly and leaders at my previous firm, like as I said, I got little tips here and there about giving feedback, about giving work, about the importance of delegation, but I also didn't get that really systemic and thoughtful method of training in these areas. And I recognized that I was at one of the biggest firms in the entire world. And if at one of the biggest firms in the entire world, they were only doing this sort of bare minimal training on these types of issues, folks at smaller firms, medium-sized firms, were probably barely getting any. Jackson Lewis is actually a bit of a odd duck when it comes to the size of it as a law firm. We are a large firm. We have over 1,000 lawyers, around 2,000 total employees. But we are broken up into around 60 offices, 60. So most of our offices are pretty small teams. So we function more like a bunch of smaller offices in a lot of respects. Obviously, we are still one large firm, but when I got there, a lot of my work and a lot of what I still try to do is identify what pain points are and to try to design solutions that can combat those pain points when it comes to well-being. Because I have to recognize that we as a firm are contributing to the well-being of our team members. And that gets to actually the very first sentence of this article I wrote for PLI. PLI reached out to me at one point. I think they originally were like, do you want to write an article about law students and well-being? I was like, could you be more specific? They were like, how about you just tell us what you want to write about? I'm also a big fan of specificity. There are a lot of generic articles about well-being these days. So I was like, you know what's been really on my mind a lot lately is this supervisory relationship. And I actually really believe it's important to tackle it from both directions. Supervisors affect supervisees, and supervisees affect supervisors. If you ask partners in large firms what their top things are affecting their mental health and well-being, one of the top ones that frequently comes up is the quality of my associates, or the blank of my associates, the work style of my associates, you name it. So we all impact each other's well-being. And I started really thinking about what is the pain point, or what are the pain points I hear about most. And I really got down to communication. And I think, so I actually went, sorry, I meant to say, the first sentence of my article really highlights the impact that managers do have. In 2023, in January, Forbes published an article highlighting that new data from the general employment sphere, not just law. And as we know, generally things are worse in law when you compare it to the general population. Forbes reported that for almost 70% of people, their manager has more impact on their mental health than their therapist or their doctor, and it is equal to the impact of their spouse or partner. So that's the level of responsibility managers are taking on when they step into a managerial role. Now, in law, most of them don't think about that. Most of them think about just sort of moving up the ranks, being promoted, and becoming a more senior lawyer, and whatever that means, more business development, more public-facing comment opportunities in the public sector, more taking on of high-profile cases in the litigation sector. Very few are thinking about the fact that when you take on a new title, you are taking on new job responsibilities. And as a manager, you are taking on the responsibility for the fact that your behavior impacts your supervisees more than almost anyone in their lives, up to and including their spouses. So I wanted to start by highlighting that. Then sort of digging in, as I said, trying to identify what pain points are in this area. And for me, I really settled on this sort of communication gap. And a lot of research and articles are out there, whether it's in the DEI space, whether it's in the educational psychology space, whether it's in the even just intercultural dynamic space in international relations. You hear about communication gaps and assumptions about that we are making by virtue of communication gaps. So I internally, before I wrote this article, we started hearing about, with 60 offices, I'm pretty sure I'm not sort of violating any firm trust by saying we started hearing about that some well-being in some offices were struggling more than others. And in some offices, we were getting a good amount of feedback that it was due to relationships between partners and associates. Associates were bringing concerns about their well-being, and they would highlight feedback they'd been given by partners. Partners would come to us highlighting the stress they felt they were under by associates not performing to their expectations. And our professional development chief and I started meeting and talking about sort of what are we gonna do about this? Because we didn't want to let it go. We recognized that it was deeply interwoven as a professional development and well-being issue, because it affected performance and it affected well-being and the relationship between the two. So we, in one of the first offices, we heard a lot of these concerns rising. It happened to be with a office managing partner who sits in one of our more leadership level capacities firm-wide. And she really wanted to experiment with us. She was like, let's come up with a program that we will deliver to the partners. It will be treated as mandatory attendance, barring some significant reason that a partner cannot attend. We'll deliver to the partners on the importance of communication and how to do it more effectively from a feedback standpoint, from a work assignment standpoint, and in ways that are non-judgmental and clear. So we went down to this office. I went down in person with our chief legal performance officer, and we delivered this training for the first time. This was maybe a year and a half ago. And it went really well. We actually, I will say this, anyone who knows me also knows I tend to overwrite and over-design things. I'm long-winded, is definitely an adjective that is used to describe me on numerous occasions. So we designed way more content than we could fit in the hour we were given. But as soon as we started really digging into the topics, the partners were very clearly engaged. They were asking deep questions. They were jumping in with what happens if I just experienced this last week with our associates. And we realized we'd hit on something that partners really cared about, because partners want to get the best performance out of their associates as quickly as possible. Even if you take the most selfish perspective of well-being in the legal sector, I don't give a crap about anyone's health or their mental health or my own. You can boil still things down to, as a supervisor, you want the best performance as quickly as possible. And you have to recognize that if things do start going sideways, your people are going to quit. And if people start quitting, then all that work that you were assigning to them doesn't disappear. It just flows back to you. And we told these partners this, like we were blunt and transparent, and we're like, listen, even if you don't agree with us about the sort of strategic impact of well-being and all of its importance, think of it from that perspective and think of it all of this as both a performance perspective and a well-being perspective. And I think that was one of the keys to its success and continues to be one of the keys to its success. A few folks, so since then, we've started giving that training, we've evolved it, we've improved it, we've given it in a number of different formats. We've brought it to offices, we've done it at the regional level. We did a version for our mentoring program where we did one for the mentors and one for the mentees, highlighting again that supervisory relationship goes both ways component. I want to talk a little bit about sort of what the content is. I unfortunately I can't share the full slide deck because it is firm proprietary stuff. But if you read my PLI article, a lot of it, the general concepts are in there. The goal being that we recognize the impact that communication and its failure has, both from a performance standpoint and a well-being standpoint. We recognize that, as I said in my article, I sort of broke clarity down into four core concepts, which I said, first, clarity is subjective. Just because you think you explained something clearly does not mean your team member clearly understood it. So again, intent versus impact, you may have heard me talk about that when I've given previous DEI talks. Even if you intended to do something clearly, if the impact was that it was not received clearly, doesn't really matter what your intent was. So clarity is subjective. Second, clarity is collaborative, meaning that it is only reached when both parties have confirmed that their understanding is shared. So a big proponent I have when you're assigning work, when you're delivering feedback, asking each other to sort of repeat it back or asking each other, what did you understand? What are you taking away from this? So that you can confirm that what you intended to come across was actually internalized. Third, clarity is efficient. For all of you saying, I don't have time to do this, I'm too busy with my work. I can tell you right up front, spending a few minutes more on communication, literally an extra 5 minutes, right? If you're writing an email, it will take you no more than 5 to 10 more minutes to write out those very much more clear instructions or clear pieces of feedback. And you will save hours, days, weeks, months on the back end because folks will actually have understood what your expectation was or what the feedback was that was being delivered in a means which they could more clearly internalize. And then finally, clarity is kind. And I took a quote from Brene Brown on this one that I really love, where she says, not getting clear with a colleague about your expectations because it feels too hard, yet holding them accountable or blaming them for not delivering is unkind. Basically, if you have an expectation, but you have not clearly conveyed it, and then you give critical feedback of how the individual employee did not meet that expectation, you have set them up for failure instead of setting them up for success. So then breaking it down past those core concepts of clarity, I talked in the article and we talked in this training about sort of multiple phases of the assignment process, whether it's giving an assignment, checking in, or giving feedback. And we talk about, in each case, where clarity is frequently not achieved, and how to get there. As I said, I strongly encourage you to read the article. It's only like 8 pages long, and the training is very similar, although there's some other stuff going on in there as well. But for example, communicating about communication at the outset. Like, do you tell folks when you're starting a new relationship with them, hey, just so you know, I tend to send emails at 11:30 at night on Friday. That does not mean I expect you to read them at 11:30 at night on Friday or even respond to them on Friday at 11:30 p.m. on Friday. That's just how my schedule works. If something is truly urgent, I will flag it as subject urgent. That basically, rather than just sort of saying like, oh, I'll be emailing you whenever, but you don't have to respond over the weekend. If you say you don't have to respond over the weekend, then you have said this person never has to respond over the weekend. And if you then say, hey, I sent you this email and I said it was pretty urgent, but I never got a response from you. And this actually happened in my very first year as an associate. A partner had told me, no matter what, don't worry about stuff on the weekend for this particular client. Come back to it on Monday is always fine. So I saw a voicemail come up that had something in the transcription of that client. So I said, great, I'll handle it Monday. And then the partner on Monday was like, what the hell? I called you over the weekend and it was urgent for this client and I got nothing. I was like, you told me that this client didn't need to work over the weekend. And he was like, yeah, but you should have known this was urgent. I was like, you told me not to think about this client. Oh, so again, it's that clarity. I was being held to an expectation that the partner understood on his end that was different from what I understood, because there hadn't been if I believe something needs to be read or responded to over the weekend, I will highlight it X way. So really thinking about those specifics about communication. Another piece I wanted to really highlight is preferences. Supervisors have preferences. Every one of you has a preference of how you like certain things done. That is okay. But you have to be able to empower folks to understand what those preferences are, so that when you get something that either doesn't align with those expectations, your preferred expectations, you have set them up for failure unless you in advance told them what those preferences were. A classic example of this I hear about all the time, and I guarantee this is happening in your organization if you are large enough, is that some lower level attorney, junior attorney somewhere in your firm has submitted similar styles of work product to 2 different partners or 2 different supervisors. One of them said it was fantastic, and the other one said it was utter garbage. This happens all the time. And what that means is that associate or that junior lawyer now has no idea what constitutes good work product or what constitutes bad work product, because they've been told by 2 supervisors within their organization that similar stuff is either objectively great or objectively terrible. Instead of framing it as, this subjectively aligns with my preferences, good job for meeting my preferences based on whatever success I set you up for, or this doesn't align with how I like to do things or how this client likes to do things, which is also totally fine. And here's why I like to do things that way, or here's why that client likes to do things a certain way. I guarantee that is one of the biggest frustrations, and I'm sure you're all adults. You've probably been in a circumstance where senior people to you within your organization have told you 2 different pieces of objective quality of your work. Even in law school, you can submit similar paper to one professor and another, and you'll get an A from one and a C from the other. Like, this happens. So my goal with when talking to supervisors in this context, or supervisees, is to help promote that clarity at the outset. If you're a supervisor, rather than saying, hey, can you write me a motion for summary judgment on X, here's all the files, here's all the background, say, here's all the files, here's all the background, and here are 3 recent motions for summary judgment that I've reviewed and thought were really good. That sets them up with 3 models that show your style that they can start from. Again, even rather than just saying, which a lot of our partners have said, and a lot of partners told me at my previous firm, just go on our file management system and search for a memo on that topic. There's a lot of difference between search for a memo on that topic and search for a memo on that topic that I authored. Again, pointing them towards stuff you as a supervisor have approved of in the past gives them a model to start from that's not just on the topic area, but highlights your personal preferences. Even better if you can actually articulate what those preferences are at the outset and why you believe they're important. I talk a lot about how lawyers, I hear a lot from senior lawyers, and actually ALM's ALM is the American Lawyer Media, aka AmLaw, the American Lawyer. They did their 2024 release of their mental health survey data like 2 weeks ago. And they noted that it was very interesting. They got a few write-in responses, as Heidi and I have gotten over the years from lawyers who are not necessarily aligned with the well-being movement. But they got a few write-in responses which indicated a trend that we're all hearing about in law, which is more senior lawyers grumbling about how these junior lawyers are just lazy and don't get it and don't want to work hard. My perspective on that has always been, they got through undergrad law school and the bar exam. They are fine working hard. There's something else going on. They might not want to work hard for you. And the question is, why don't they want to work hard for you? Google, one of the largest employers in the world, did a study over the course of 10 years on certain of their teams in which were most productive and effective. And one of the number one things that came out of it was trust. If, and a quote I pulled from an article describing that study highlights, if you believe that someone you're working for has your best interests at heart, if you as a supervisee trust that your manager is looking out for you rather than looking out for the product alone, then you will do almost anything for them. I had a partner who I worked with at my old firm who had a reputation for being a little blunt and aggressive. He and I wound up having the best relationship of nearly any partner I worked for, because what he conveyed was always clear to me. It was never, you're a bad lawyer. It was, this doesn't work because why? Like, he wouldn't hold back, he wouldn't, and again, coddling is not clear and not kind either, because by not delivering constructive feedback, you wind up growing to resent the person as a whole and believe they are incapable of success. There has been research in law, in big firms actually, that, and I read about this in law school, so it's been a long time ago, but there was a study that highlighted that partners who worked with associates who started from a real struggle point, one partner wrote those associates off and never wanted to work with them again. Others were like, those are the ones I want to work with, because those are the ones I can help mold into the ones that will align with sort of my preferences and styles. The one who really wanted to work with those associates most of those associates wound up becoming partners at that firm eventually. And it showed that just because someone from the outset isn't meeting your expectations, or even one thing I hear about all the time, sorry, I'm rambling and switching topics a little bit, but one thing I hear about is, well, what if I've given the same feedback over and over to an associate and they're just not getting it? My first response is, what aren't they getting, right? There's something that they are clearly not understanding about the expectations that are put on them, or something is going on in their personal or professional life that is impacting their ability to do the volume of work that is expected or meet the deadlines in this particular period of time, and they're too afraid to tell you that, which is also part of like, what aren't you getting, or what they're not getting it, what aren't you getting about them? So one of the things I often talk with partners about is, so timekeeping. By the way, if any of you are training junior lawyers, for the love of God, train them early on the importance of keeping their time every single day, because the longer it goes, the longer the greater stress it builds. And then if you're trying to reconstruct your entire month at the end of the month, or at the end of 2 months, or at the end of 3 months, it's a nightmare and induces constant panic and depression. I have seen it countless times over. However, so I hear all the time about like, well, what if these associates just aren't entering the time, just aren't entering the time, just aren't entering the time? I like to talk to them about sort of both sort of why it's important to enter the time, both from a revenue standpoint and from their own mental well-being standpoint. And then, have you explored what system they're using to track their time? Have you said, are you trying a notebook? Are you trying the software's built-in timer function? Are you trying X, Y, Z? Same thing with typos. I hear a lot about, well, partners just saying, well, like, all my juniors just have typos and grammatical edits and grammatical errors. And it's like, first off, so do you. I've yet to see a senior lawyer that has produced consistently flawless work product that doesn't have any typos or grammatical errors in it. And second, explore with them what their proofreading process is, rather than saying, it looks like you barely spent any time on this, or it really seems like you're just being lazy when it comes to proofreading. What is their proofreading process? Again, focusing less on the judgment, asking the question, rather than making the assumption that they just rushed it out and didn't do any review. For all you know, this person stayed up all night reading it on their screen over and over and over. I am guilty of this. If I read stuff on my screen even a few times, there's probably still going to be some typos in it. For me, what works is reading it out loud. Reading something I've written out loud, that's what helps me catch my typos or errors. For other people, it's printing it out and marking it up by hand. For other people, it's using AI or automated software like Grammarly, which is really helpful at catching grammar and spelling issues. So exploring options with them to correct or give them a new process, rather than saying, you're lazy, this sucked. So again, if you take anything away from this, I think I'm sort of at time if we want to have a 30-minute or so conversation. If you take anything away, it's recognizing that, the one piece, sorry, I forgot to mention, is supervisees, train them to ask the question too. Like, train them to not leave the meeting unless they think they have the clarity they need. And empower them to do so. And say, like, if you don't have if the partner didn't give you a deadline or the senior lawyer didn't give you a deadline, ask for a deadline or propose a deadline. That's actually my favorite is I propose getting this to you by Wednesday at 2 p.m. And by the way, specific deadlines are far more effective than mid next week, for example, because mid next week could mean Tuesday morning to one person or Friday morning to another. So really specific deadlines, empowering juniors to ask for that clarity, to seek it out and say like, and when they're given feedback, say, here's what I tried. How do you recommend I try a different process? Again, helping them move past the ego-driven, I've just been attacked and been told I'm worthless as a lawyer and human being, instead moving to how can I, dear partner who've been practicing this for 20 years and believe you are owed all of this respect and bowing and deferring, how do you recommend I change my process? What process works for you to catch typos and grammatical errors? Asking for those suggestions and asking the question, training juniors to hit that point is really important too. So if you take anything away from this, it's go read my 8-page article where I said a lot of this in a lot shorter words. To think about how in your organization you can start really training. And I will say part of the most effective component of this is that when we've been doing it in offices, it has been treated as semi-mandatory. Like you have to give an excuse to not attend. And this is true of partners as well. Give real training on how to effectively communicate with each other and frame it in the context of improving performance more quickly than it would otherwise, and well-being to reduce attrition, to reduce mental health distress, and to help build these lawyers into what you want them to be. I always say, whenever you're about to give feedback, remind yourself, what is the objective of me giving feedback? If it is make this other person feel like crap, I think it might be time to revise the strategy. And I'm saying that honestly, some people think it is really important to make lawyers feel the burden of their mistakes. I guarantee they probably already do. And making them feel it more is not going to positively impact their behavior in the future. The goal of any piece of feedback is to inspire behavior change. The goal of any piece of feedback is to inspire behavior change. So focus on that. How, why, and what? What is the specific change you're looking for? How, what process changes can you help that attorney? And different things work for different people, so don't demand one process. Help them explore multiple different process options. How and why? Lawyers are like small children. If you tell them, because I said so, it is not valuable. If you tell them, I like it done this way because, then that gives them a reason to understand your perspective and why you're asking them to do something, which will help them trust you, because it'll help them trust that you are looking out for them and for their clients and not just themselves. So I'll stop rambling now.
I think what I'm gonna do at this point, Gavin, that was fantastic, but I think what I'm gonna do is stop the recording here.
Sure.
So that if people do wanna chime in, they don't have to be worried about it being recorded. So Sybil, do you mind just stopping the recording at this point?